Good afternoon and welcome everybody to day number 5. We've made it to Friday of webinar week number 3 here with Beyond Pulse and our coach education series. Absolutely delighted today to firstly welcome back Mr. Mark Wilson in the co-pilot seat after a day's break yesterday. But perhaps most importantly, Mr. Michael Beale, who joins us from Scotland. Mick, really appreciate you sharing your time with us this evening for where you are and the insight that you're about to share with the listeners now and then those that catch up on demand. All I want to say is obviously how excited I am personally to be able to delve into your journey and how confident I am that the messages that you're about to share and the insight is going to be of such value to whether you're a coach or a player, and no matter what level you work at, the insight and education advice that Mick can share will be invaluable. So without me butchering the rest of your intro and the background, Mick, if you could just a minute or so for those who might be less familiar with you, your background, your journey, and your unique kind of stance on both the youth and now professional levels of football. If you could take it away, that'd be great.
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having us on. It's a real pleasure to come and talk and share ideas. I started as a coach at like the age of 21, my own soccer schools. It was futsal based. There was a guy over here in the UK that was doing quite well with a thing called Brazilian soccer schools. He's the guy that sort of did the choreographing behind Bend It Like Beckham, if you remember the famous film, and Jimmy Grimble and other films like that. And he became friends with Juninho, the Brazilian that played for Middlesbrough. He was a school teacher. He started soccer schools, Simon Clifford. And I came out of the game. I was a young pro at Charlton, and it didn't work out. And I come out of the game a bit disillusioned. I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I really liked that idea. It was indoors. It was futsal or football de salão. It was very individual based, very skill based, which was the stuff that I loved when I played. I was like a fouled winger. I was like a really bad Chris Waddle, if you can imagine that. So yeah, I got started in that, my own soccer school. I rented a church hall and like it cost me £32 for an hour, and I was charging £4 a kid, and 3 kids turn up. So it wasn't the best business plan to start off with, but word of mouth took off. After about 4 or 5 months, I ended up getting a job opportunity to go to Chelsea to take the under 6s, 7s and 8s, putting the cones out. That quickly progressed, really quickly actually, and ended up becoming an under 9s assistant, under 9s coach, under 10s coach. And I spent 10 years in total at Chelsea from probably the start of 2003, March time, up until the summer or the September of 2012 when I left to join Liverpool. So I ended up being under 14s coach at Chelsea and youth development officer, and which was heading up that 6 to 8s program. Went to Liverpool to be head of 15s, 16s. After about 3 months, there was a new reserve team manager came in, a guy called Alex Inglethorpe from Tottenham. He made me assistant to him. So I was doing 15s, 16s and assistant to the 23s. At the end of the next season, he became academy manager. I became on the 23s coach. So I did that for 3 years, and then I had an offer to go to Sao Paolo in Brazil as assistant manager. So at the end of, there's this thing about resigning from football clubs. It's like a theme for me. But at the end of that year, in December 2016, I resigned from Liverpool to go to Sao Paolo. I was there for 8 months and I came back. I resigned from Sao Paolo and came back and rejoined Liverpool. This time, went from first team assistant manager all the way back to being head of foundation phase, so the head of coaching for 6 to 11-year-olds and mentoring the staff there, back to something that I'd done many years previous, and did that for 8 months and then resigned to come to Rangers as first team coach for Steven Gerrard. So I keep just resigning from places and turning up somewhere else. But it's been an amazing journey. Like I see myself as a developer. I don't use the word youth before development. I feel really privileged to work with the players and the clubs I am. I was a Chelsea fan as a kid, so that was special. But Liverpool is like, wow, what a football club Liverpool is. It's just my whole experience at Liverpool was amazing. The experience that all the clubs has, but obviously Brazil was unique, and now Rangers as well. What another fantastic football club. So I'm very lucky.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mick. It's a very humble overview. I think that the one thing that has fascinated me with your journey is that really you did it off the back of no real professional career, and the fact that you've now worked with some of the best and brightest talents in the country, and obviously at a first team level in 2 different countries. It's a fascinating journey and some real intriguing perspective that as we said, I'm looking forward to sharing with everybody. So Thank you for that. I think for the benefit of the people that are listening, if you were unfamiliar with Mick and his background, obviously the clubs that he's just dropped into the conversation there, and the caliber of experience that he's got to share, it's going to be a fun ride this hour. So so stay tuned. Mick, I obviously spoke to you and I gave you a little bit of a warning of kind of questions that we've asked based on the theme of inspiration and people that have, in these difficult times, just acknowledging kind of best practice. Very, very understandably, you're like, it's too difficult for me to identify specific players or staff, so we're going to do it differently. And I'm going to ask you if you could give me a five-a-side team of the characteristics that you think make up the elite youth player that can then transition to become a pro, and the characteristics needed to be an elite youth coach, or a pro coach, the best coach you can possibly be. So a five-a-side team of each, just made up of characteristics, if we could, pal.
Apologies for not giving you my five-a-side team of players. It was just purely because of the sheer volume and not want to upset anyone. I explained I did something with Rangers and it was like 40 players, and it was just a disaster. But in terms of like a player, a coach, a young coach, I think personality is huge, like personality to inspire and interact. You can have a great knowledge, but you've got to have a personality. I think the second thing is a real passion, because underneath these professional coaches that we see on TV, there's a whole lot that are doing a fantastic job at grassroots and in youth academies and youth professional academies and in all levels of the game, in disability sport, in the boys' side and the girls' side. So I think this real passion for learning and developing. I think you have to have an eye for the player, and then I think you've got to have a vision and a process of how you're going to develop. So I would say personality, passion, eye for a player, vision, and then the one that I think is massive is you've got to be able to communicate it. And I think that's huge. And I think that, there's little things with communication. People forget that body language is huge. So what's the mirror image of your touchline behavior if you're working with young kids? If you're working with seniors, do you complicate it? Because they're still individual footballers. They still want to see how this relates to them. So it's watering your message down. I'm going to give you the five now for players, but there's one in between that I think is important for both, which I'll say at the end. In terms of players, what would I look for? If they were young, I would look for movement mechanics. I think movement mechanics are really important. I think you can improve them, but I think if you see 100 kids running around, some have really good movement mechanics. And from that, then their relationship with the ball is a lot easier, i.e. so if you're putting the technique into them. So I think movement mechanics is number one. I look for relationship with the ball. Do they really love being with the ball? Do they feel at home with it? Are they able to manipulate it? Have they got that real pride in their self-technique, which I think is important. The next one is the appetite for the game. So if there's no coaches there, would they play? Would they go outside in their garden and play? In this period of isolation, are they out practicing? I think that's huge. Again, I think personality, when you watch the best players when they're young, when you're young, the best players are always the best ones in their team. And then they go on to play for an academy where then there's a lot of good players, and they get to senior first team football and there's a lot of good players again. But when they're young, I think you see personality on the pitch. I think you see it with the biggest players as well, whether that be a Roy Keane type in the middle of the pitch, or whether it be a centre forward like Thierry Henry, the way they carry themselves, that's personality. The last one, I think, for any young player or any player is, do they have a clear identity? So do they know who they are, where they're going, and what they're good at? And I think that's where coaching helps. So there's the five for that. The one I think that's sub for both teams, if you like, is to be bilingual, because I think the way the game's going now, I think the ability to learn a second language, I've tried to stay with the players there more on like what I see off my eye. Of course, they got to be resilient, but I think a lot of the resilience things is the adults selling the pathway and the journey and managing it. So I think that resilience, we can help a little bit, because I think the perseverance, resilience, or the mental stamina a young player needs, I think as the adults, as the coaches, I think we can help with that as well. I think that's very hard for a young person to have unless we're helping.
Yeah, that's brilliant, and there's obviously so much in that I want to kind of dig into as we go through this conversation. Specifically, the point that obviously you picked up when you traveled halfway around the world to Brazil, and the fact that you still currently practice a second language. So I'll definitely get into that, because I think it's so important for the development of everybody, and definitely the way that the game's going at an elite level. So some wonderful insight. And guys, I forgot to mention as we came live here, if you have questions for Mick, please feel free throughout this to pop up in the chat function. Obviously, I will go through what we have on the end of myself and Mark, but if you have specific questions or want a little bit more insight or info into something that he said, please feel free to jump in. So Mick, great place to start. What I want to get into to begin with, obviously in your background you referenced that you've had the fortune of working with some of the best young players in the country. I want to ask you, how do you go about supporting them on the grass with their transition to pro careers? So if we think about the creation of practices, the behaviors and the interaction that you have with them, how can you provide an insight into how you go about eking out those kind of 1% marginal gains and the specificity or detail that you might need to consider when planning a session or when providing feedback?
Yeah, it's such a wide question, that, Tom, because it's at what age. So I'll quickly fly through. I think that when they start, before they get to the big school, which in England's under 12, before you go to your senior school or your secondary school, we call it, I think everything prior to that is like having this hard drive of techniques. So I would say it's like you're receiving skills, you're moving with the ball, which is you're running or you're dribbling, and you're releasing, which is passing, shooting, it's ball striking. And I think that that's really key. And then coupled to that is the ability to play 1v1 in your way. So it's outplaying a direct opponent. And I think the thing that you have to add to that, because of maturation, if I'm a small kid and you're a big one, you might in a one-to-one just be able to steamroll me. So when I get it, I need use of the second player, i.e. so I might play a 1-2 off Mark. Mark might make a movement that moves your eyes, which means I can use that as a disguise. I might pass, fake to move, and just sort of take a step and come back to receive it. So I think that your hard drive techniques and your ability to outplay or be smart and problem solve in the one-to-one, but with the second player, I think it's really, really important. I think then when you get to the big pitch, a bit like your secondary education, you start learning a lot about yourself, what subjects you like, what food you like. You start building this little personality as a young teen into a mid-teen into a young adult. And I think that football's got to follow that pathway. I think you've got to understand why you play. I think the next thing you need to understand is, what you're good at and how do you make your strengths super strength. And I think that then you build a little identity, which I call like your football personality. Just as you're building your personality as a little human, I think you build it. And I wouldn't hand out scholarships now at 16. Obviously, for those that are working over in the US, scholarships, obviously they leave school and they come in as a young professional at 16, 17, 18. And that 2-year period's about learning your craft, if you like, before you turn professional. I wouldn't hand that out unless a boy can stand in front of you and tell you why we invested in you. Because I think if you leave school at 16 in the UK and you go and do a job interview, you'd have to say why you want the job. And what I see with young players now is that they if you went to university and you did 6 years, you'd be a master in something. Some kids are in our academies for 10 years and they can't tell you why they're a good player. So there must be something fundamentally wrong with our teaching. So for me, it's always about what you're good at, how do you make your strengths a super strength, and how do you have this clear identity when you play. As they get older, it's how do you get this lovely identity, you and how you play, inside the team vehicle to help you get to the next level, the next level, next level. But for me, everything you do is for the individual. Like, I think everything, and I think when the younger they are, you have to be very parent friendly. I think you've got to involve the parents in the process as well to understand. I think you're trying to educate young football players, but you're also trying to educate parents as well that might be going through it for the first time. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I would really plead clubs to be parent friendly because they buy into it. So I just think I would bring everything back to the individual. And a bit like when you become a father, I think you improve as a coach. And I think when you go to a school to do like a parents' evening, you only want to know about your son or your daughter. You don't want to know about the whole group. And I think academies really have to go that route to support the players. I think we need to take the players and make them more independent every single day. So they start off at under 9s very dependent on you, but every single day they're there, they should become more independent as they grow. And I think we've before they get to first team level, we've really got to teach these kids, or we've got to give them the clarity of what ownership is. And I think we talk about ownership a lot in youth development in all sports, and we talk about it with just young people in general without really giving that clarity. Because once you get to the first team, you've got to stand on your own 2 feet. And if you work with some good young players, you think you might have 2 or 3 years and they just fly through the teams because their talent takes them there. But when they hit a brick wall or they have a problem, can they put themselves back together? You know, have they got the people around them to communicate or actually a process in their mind of how to put themselves back together? So the relationships now for coaching, especially at the top end of academies, you're there because you're a good coach. You'll develop players or not because whether you can manage the relationships well, I believe. I think the off-field stuff's huge now.
In terms of how you would go around maximizing the development of that individual in a practice session, we spoke offline, and I forget the podcast that I heard you reference this in, but there was one where I think you were talking about a session where the focus was on building out the back, but you had a striker who was basically bypassing it. What were they doing there if they weren't getting reps that were going to help them become better? So you switched the start point of the activity to include or allow for a shot on goal first, and then for the team to build. So when you're planning the sessions that you're going to work with, how important are ideas like that to your ability to maximize individual development?
Yeah, I think how you start and end how you start a practice and how you make sure everyone's involved in the session is really important. It's part of the, you know, the planning process, and the planning's huge. I think how you pick teams in your session and who you put against who. So if you're having a 6v6 game and I say, right, Tom, I'm going to judge you and Mark in this game, and who makes the most passes or who dominates the midfield, straight away that's a game within a game. So I've affected you. You don't have to take the individual out. Like you're saying there with the striker, he's obviously, while one team's working on playing out, he's working on pressing from the front. But that boy lives for scoring goals. So you need to guarantee in that session he's going to get an opportunity to score some. Because what happens if the other team are fantastic at playing out, and now it's just a pressing session for him. But I think the most important thing is in your group, you'll have strikers and you'll know who the top one is. So when you sit down with your striker and you go, look, we need to work on finishing, we're going to work on finishing in this area or that area. These are sort of chances we create as a team, or you get in a game. I might be saying that to Mark, and he's the one I think is going to go the furthest, but that's relevant to you, Tom, as well, and maybe 1 or 2 others in the group. So when we go off and do finishing, there's that lovely feeling from all the players that they think it's for them because we've had that conversation. And as you go up the age groups and you're full time in football, you have an opportunity to have breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner at the club. So it's making sure you don't sit on a staff table on them days, you know, and you spread yourself around and you have a lot of informal conversations with the players about where they're going and what they want to become and what their identity is. And then when you plan, I think the young players think, oh, that's for me. Mick's planned that for me. But yes, I have. But as I explained, like the players don't realise you've planned that for all the forwards or for all the midfielders or for all the defenders, whatever it is you're working on. I like to have a lot of staff around the session. Some people don't, but I don't believe in Superman sessions, I call them, where, you know, one's taking it, everyone's around it. I like to work. I like to have coaches looking at units. So I think your goalie coach obviously takes that, but I like to split the staff between, if there's 2 of your front half, back half, if there's 3 of you, the units of defenders, midfield, forwards, and I like to have people around it. When you're playing a game in training, then people can obviously go off and speak to their own little unit rather than you know, all focusing on maybe the player that they think is the best player in the group. I think that's the skills of coaching at the top end. I think if you're working with just yourself and a group of players, then using things like the restart that you explained there is important. I think it's just I don't know, you've just got to make sure you get round your players. I think if you've got a squad at 18, 20, over the space of a week, if you've got 3 sessions, have you affected everybody? And I think that the best way to affect people is to play the game, because that's what they're there to do. They're not there to do all your little drills that look like the game. They actually just want to play. That's what young people want to do now. They want to play the game. And then I think how you can cleverly affect them within that is important.
Yes, again, it's people that know me, it's music to my ears when we speak about ideas like that, and the ability to have the foresight to individualize or differentiate games within games, right, and trading off like you said, maybe it's two midfielders that are playing against one another. It's a forward versus a defender for shots on goals or shots versus blocks, something that's kind of manipulates the level of challenge to suit as many players as possible. Mick, I wanted to ask you, just as from a perspective of bridging the gap, when you're working at the oldest level of the youth game, the 16s, the 17s, the 18s, especially in England, how often are your sessions built around the one or two players that you think have pro potential? And if they are, how do you continue to engage and motivate the rest of the group? Because I think there's people on the line that work in the college space, and obviously that more often than not, there's clearly defined starters and then substitutes, and and then just people that are making up squads. So how do you go about keeping that kind of collective buy-in and hunger and desire there for everybody if the focus is specifically on just a couple?
I think that 80% of what you're doing on the pitch is based on the environment prior to arriving on the pitch and the conversations that you've had. So it's how people arrive to your pitch. You might have the best session in the world, but it's how they arrive on the training pitch, whether they feel that you're pulling for them and you're developing them. So I think a lot of your work's done off the pitch, in terms of like unit work. And I would say if you had 3 sessions a week and it's just you, then do some individual work at the end of each session with a different unit. So maybe defenders one day, midfielders another, forwards, and mix it up a little bit, and maybe work fullbacks and wide players. You work into units. But I think, like I said, I think if you have a conversation with all your forwards in a room about what you want from them, if you're a college team or if you're a younger team, what's the qualities of top centre forwards, right? Next time I put an individual practice, I'm going to put that sort of work on. Everyone buys into it a little bit more because they've had an input in the conversation. Again, if I feel that you're the player with more potential than Mark's taking part in it, he thinks that's for him, but I know it's for you. The players don't need to know that. So within a group, you'll have 4 or 5 midfielders. What the reason you're staying out and doing that passing exercise or that shooting from distance or that work with linking with the centre forward, who it's for, but the other players they're a little bit ignorant to it, but they're getting the work as well. And what I would say to people that are working in youth development is just keep watching players, because we've all made judgments on players and thinking they won't. And some players get caught standing still, and some players grow every day. And I think that it's never set with young players. I've got this massive thing about gold medalists, silver medalists. I think the best young players get too many pats on the back, and they get like this gold medalist mentality. And we need young players having a silver medalist mentality. They can be the best player in your club in that age group or in your club in general, but there's a big world out there. And certainly where I work in the UK, the amount of money we spend on players coming in from overseas, it's no good being at Rangers and being the best player in Glasgow. You need to be the best player in the UK and in your position, and the best player, with some players in Europe, because that's where we're going to recruit from. So I think the silver medalist mentality thing's massive. And I think you have to promote a lot of things with your group in terms of the characters and behaviours that you want. And I think that they're looking at you to be a leader in that. And I think what I really think is, if you had 3 centre backs and 1 you think is going to be a pro and 2 you think might make a living and 1 you don't think is going to make a living, they probably all need to work on the same stuff anyway to get to the level where they're going. And I think you pitch it at the level as your top one. But I just think that's where your personal qualities come out. That personality that I said is essential. I think this is where you've really seen. And I treat every kid like he's my son, or every man now like he's my brother, if you like. And that's a big part of your work. Do you know what I mean?
That kind of leads me into a question that I've thought about and had a couple of discussions with MLS clubs about recently. Given I suppose the lack of minutes that college draft players or young players are getting in the MLS right now, there's lots of talk about this transition from elite youth to senior pro, and what are the inhibitors, what are the issues, what are the problems. And there's a ton of talent out there, and I'm a big believer in your mentality will define your career, not your talent. If you've got both, brilliant, you're onto something. But a lot of players, or a lot of young players I meet and speak to now, and I say young 16, 17, 18, there's a lot of barriers to break down before you can get to know who they really are. And they're very guarded, and that might be a societal thing from the way they have to interact and the pressure of social media and this constant need to play up to a stereotype as a professional athlete. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mick, on the psychological barriers that some very, very talented youth players have, and they'll go up into the first team environment, but you won't know it. They won't say out loud, like, how do I interact in a first team locker room? What if I mess up? What if I get some of the conditions and constraints wrong? What will the coach think of me? You know, do these players think I'm coming in to take their place? Well, one, you should already be thinking that I want your spot. But how are they going to react to it? And I think there's layers of questions that really affect a young player's mentality that can be inhibitors. So are there any mechanisms you put in place or have seen being put in place to support that transition from youth to senior pro?
Yeah, firstly, I completely agree. I see a lot of players get to first team level or within the first team squad and not be a starter, and their individual program goes out. They end up getting pulled with the first team schedule. Academy staff are not sure if they should be leading it because they don't want to step on first team staff shoes. First team staff are busy with the game every 3 days and the main players in their team. And this talented young player gets caught in the middle of nowhere, you know, and can get lost. And I agree with that. I think this is where I prefer to work younger down to get players to speak for themselves. I've got this huge thing that we love arrogance in French players and Spanish players in the UK. We love this confidence. Someone like Zlatan, when he talks about how good a player he is, hating our own. It's a very much a British thing. We knock our kids down. I'm not saying I want to produce loads of kids that talk the world up, but I want them to be able to articulate and be confidently about, you know, the reason they play the game and the strengths they bring. I want them to have a stronger identity. I think it will help them in when they get across to the first team. I think also the people that receive you when you get to the first team are really important. Having someone in the first team staff that understands development, that has had, the opportunity and the experience previously of trying to help people transition. So we have, for give me an example here at Rangers, where it's the first chance I've had to be able to implement something I believe in, is we have like integration days where the best players in our under 20s, it's not under 23s here, or the players that we see as doing well with potential. When the first team play in an evening, we'll still train in the morning with the non-squad players. So it's probably a 50-50 split of maybe 6 or 7 first team players that are not in the squad or come back from injury or suspended, and 6 younger ones. I'll take it, and that's quite a nice integration session. And I think then the day after we play, instead of having that day off, the starters will have a recovery, and then it will be the subs plus them non-squad players and the young ones again. So I think it's a softening session because you're going in with your own peers. I think also how you're received when you come in, how the staff talk to you about how to be yourself. I think this is where one club philosophies really, really help. But there's an element, Mark, as you know, because you've made this step about sinking and swimming. Do you know what I mean? I do think the staff around you they've obviously seen something in you to allow you to go over and, in your case, play with Man United's first team there, what a level that is. They've seen something in you. The first day you go over, you're not going to be the best player, but it's them coaches believing in what they saw and also working to a process. And I think that's it. I think young players or young people in general now, it's a technology age, and I think we've got to do so much to help them communicate. I think, and have this self-awareness and this self-being. I think identity is a massive thing. I'll keep coming back to it. I also think role models are. We have Jermaine Defoe here, who's brilliant with the young centre forwards, for example. We have Stephen Davis, who's obviously a Northern Irish international. He's fantastic. It's hard to ask your younger players who are 23 to be them role models, by the way. You have to have good people in the club and you have to have role models there. When we first come to Rangers, for example, 1 or 2 of the young 20-year-old midfielders or 23-year-old midfielders found it really difficult because it was Steven Gerrard and Gary McAllister as your coaches. And I think the way they were towards them people helped them settle and fulfill their potential and obviously play and do well. And I think that's it. I think the environment you create in your club, is it conducive towards development and getting better every day? And I think that's huge.
Mick, I want to build on that with what you started talking about earlier, which is the importance of being bilingual, and perhaps now, especially as you bridge that gap and you've said, you're a club who will look and scour the European market, maybe the South American market for people. You've spoken about the importance of connection and understanding what they're going through and building that culture. So for the benefit of the coaches on the line, talk to the importance of having that ability to communicate in their own language, how it might help them settle, how it might help you better understand some of the challenges culturally that they're kind of might be facing, and why you think it's so valuable for any coach to have that in his or her locker.
Well, it was twofold, really. When I started coaching, it was obviously at Chelsea. Ranieri was manager, then Mourinho, Scolari, Avram Grant, Carlo Ancelotti. All these coaches, they're world famous. You know, what an opportunity just to see or just have some drip fed some of the stuff they were doing. They were obviously fantastic coaches that were role models, but they were also very, very intelligent people. And the reason they were working in the UK was also they were speaking in the second language. So communication being what I feel was very, very important. The ability to sell your message to players. So that was a really clear thing for me. There was no point me moaning about not getting on in my career. If the people that were coming in and taking the jobs, or the people that were in the jobs, had better, you know, skills and qualifications than me in terms of, and I feel language was huge. So that was one part of my inspiration to want to do it. I've always wanted to work abroad. That's been my aim. And then the second thing is, as I was going through the age groups and working at under 23s, I was working with a lot of European foreign players and learning a lot about cultures and how people are different. The biggest eye-opener was when I left London to go and work in Liverpool. So you have the London, the South mentality to the mentality in the Northwest, and it's different. It's a different culture. They see the game slightly differently in the two clubs. So there's a culture of two clubs. And then at both clubs, I was working with top European players. And then when the opportunity came to Brazil, what a fantastic opportunity to learn from South American players. And I took loads from that as well. But for me, my parents live in Mallorca. They have done for 15 years. So I've tried to learn Spanish. And the fact that I needed to learn it was different to, or sort of wanted to learn it, should I say, is that I learned a few lessons and did a few lessons, learned a few words, but it never stuck. And then I had 2 weeks to go to Brazil where I didn't want to learn Portuguese. I needed to. And it stuck. Wow, them 17 hours I did, and then I just went there and didn't take another lesson and cracked on. And I used to write the session plans out in Portuguese each day. It changed the way I writ the sessions as well. Instead of writing down the rules of the practices, then it made me think, why have I ever written a session plan where I writ down the rules of the practice? It's my practice. I know it. I need to write down who I'm talking to and what I'm saying. So it made me better at communication. It made me learn a lot about culture. It opened me up to learning as well, you know, selective reading and different ways of seeing the game as well. And it's something that I promote to everybody. I promote the opportunity to go and work outside your local area, whether that's British coaches coming to USA, vice versa, going to different areas in Europe. You know, I'm active project at the minute speaking to coaches that have been on that journey because I am fascinated by that. And I remember as a young coach when I started, it was Bobby Robson and Terry Venables. They were the idols because they'd been to be manager of Barcelona and Porto and Sporting Lisbon and clubs like this. And I think they were respected, but they obviously had learned the second language. And I thought that was a shining light for British coaches. So I just think it's huge now. I think you shouldn't be able to pass your pro license, your A license without enrolling on some sort of lesson learning. And I'm not talking about speaking it perfect, because my Portuguese, I hope you're not going to embarrass me in a minute by asking me to speak it, but my Portuguese is not perfect. But on a one-to-one conversation or to hold a session, I can do that now, and I really enjoyed that process.
Yeah, and I think it just speaks even further, Mick, to we use the phrase that everybody's heard before: players don't care what they know until they know that you care, and just having that capacity to interact on their wavelength in certain situations, I'm sure is so powerful, especially in an elite professional environment where that kind of element of a home comfort and the connection that it can build between coach and player is probably so powerful. So Willow, you've turned your mic on, mate. Fire away with.
You mentioned a difference between having to or wanting to and the need to. And my wife's Ecuadorian, so I'm currently struggling to learn Spanish, but now we have a son. So I have to learn Spanish because obviously we want him to be bilingual. And it's funny that enhanced I need to has made a difference. And I'm still terrible. Still, the gringo accent is still with me, and it will disappear at some point. But I think if you have a real purpose and a need to learn a language, I think that makes a whole world of difference. So be intentional about it. Don't just kind of scratch at the surface. Be intentional about it if you are actually going to go and take that on board and add that string to your bow as a coach.
Yeah, I would say I would say it's huge. I just think that, I learned a lot about culture in terms of needs and wants as well. So when I came back to England and I was working back at Liverpool, I was able to say to the young players there, like, there's people out there that need to play. They need it for family reasons, for financial reasons. Everyone says that finances are ugly in football. They're not if you're doing it for family reasons. It's actually beautiful. For some people in some part of the world, in South America, European countries as well, some parts of the UK. I'm not saying in general that there's players in England that don't, that just want to be players, and no one needs to be. I'd say Wayne Rooney, Steven Gerrard, they needed to be a player. It was their burning desire every day. John Terry, there's a lot of professionals like that. But, there's players in Europe and in the US, if they don't make it as a player, they'll still have a comfortable life. There's other parts of the world where that need is greater. And I think, and I agree completely, like when it came to learning a language, it's, take it step by step. It's a whole part of learning something that I think helps you as a coach when you're working with players as well. Our repetition and our consistency of practice and little short bits every single day all sort of linked together. You sort of can relate that back to your day-to-day work with players. So I found it fascinating, I've got to be honest.
And it's fascinating insight that you're sharing, mate. So thank you. And please, if people on the line are motivated by this, let us know how you get along, because it would be great to see. Maybe we can put Mick on the spot in a few weeks' time and have an hour of basic intro to Portuguese. You can put your teaching skills to the test. Guys, I'm going to move on, and thank you for the chats that are coming up in the messages. I'm going to go with it, just turn it to the players for a couple, and then we'll kind of wrap this and open it up to the questions from the audience. But Mick, wanted to speak for the benefit of the players on the line. What's the biggest advice you could give to the players on how they separate themselves if everybody around them is also exceptional, right? You're not going to be a U18 at Chelsea or a 23 at Liverpool if there's a bunch of deficiencies in your game. So if you're all similar, how are you the one that kind of steps up and elevates themselves to create a career? What would your defining characteristics or recommendations be there?
I think you've got to realise that everyone's journey is unique, and you can't look sideways to compare only for inspiration. If you look sideways to compare and someone's doing better than you in this moment, I think you won't come to work the next day. I think it's really important that if you do look at your peers right and left in different clubs, their situation is different to yours. I always say that it's not how quick you get there, it's how long you stay. And I've got this saying in professional football that after 100 games, football will tell you what level you're playing at. So you might make your debut in the Premier League and end up in League Two. You might make it in League Two, end up in the Premier League. And I think that's it. It's about steadily growing and developing each day. It's not how good you are, it's where you're going. And I think this is why having a clear identity and understand, I call it football personality, because it's easier for people to understand what is identity. It's football personality. And I think then having this real ownership or understanding of clarity of what ownership is, and I'll quickly answer that. I think it is your self-awareness. So what are you at your best is number one. Number two, how do you train it every single day then? Because that's very personal to you. What are you? What are you trying to become? How do you train it every day? The third thing is, how does that fit inside the team and in terms of the relationships on the pitch? If we're a midfield three, how does our dynamic work together? If one of us is not playing and another player comes in, do me and Mark play the same, or do we adapt? So it's your awareness of how to fit your playing style in the team. The last one, or the fourth one, is relationship management. Would your teammates pick you? How's your relationship with your staff, with the manager, with the fans, with social media nowadays? How do you carry yourself as a young person that you want people to invest into? I think these things are really, really important. You have to be investable. And so I think having ownership of your career, but coaches giving you clarity on that, and then not looking sideways. Your journey is unique, and I think all you can do is just keep improving. And football will take you where you deserve to be, or where your level is, as long as you maximise your potential. So a lot of people will won't believe in that saying that football, the doors won't open. I believe the doors will open. They might not open as quick as you want them to, but then how long is your perseverance? How much does your dream mean to you? And Are you getting better? Are you really taking ownership? Or is it, oh, the coach here doesn't play young players, or the door's blocked here, or they only buy foreign players? If you're going to put the bricks on the wall that's in front of you yourself, then yeah, you're right. You need to feed your own mindset. And I think that's why the environment you create within your club, obviously you can give a lot of advice to coaches and other clubs, but ultimately it's a bit like when you look after your children, when you shut the front door, you need to look after the kids in your own club and make sure that you've got that right environment in place.
That bit brings me, Mick, to when I think about, and on the question Tom's just asked, how do you differentiate yourself? I didn't mature as a player till I was 26. I was an immature, and if we've said this on the last webinar, I was very up and down. You can see it by the stats. You're right. After you've played 100 games, you'll figure out where consistently you probably belong. And what hindered me in the early part of my career was my mentality. I wasn't mature enough. If I wasn't in the first team or yo-yoing, I'd point the finger at somebody else. You start to do things off the field that you weren't doing before to that point. And all of a sudden I became very inconsistent. So the first time I asked myself this question, or actually it was a manager who asked me it, who do you influence when you're at your very best, and who influences you when you're at your very best? So the question was posed around everybody else but myself, but he was asking me, when am I at my best? And I quickly realized that what I needed to be at my best, and two, what I needed to do to help other people be at their best. The penny kind of dropped with that one of those questions, or that question in particular, that brought a level of consistency to performance for me. So a question to you would be, if you've ever asked that question or something like that, what's one of the best answers you've had from a player when you've asked a similar type question of why you the player you are, what makes you the player you are?
Well, I think that, I'm excited by people that are quite clear. I'm a goal scorer, and I'm like, because then that leads to working. So, okay, you're a goal scorer. Okay, let's sit then. Let's watch the goals that you score. Okay, so you're scoring goals. We need to practice them. We need to make your strength a super strength. Right? Let's watch. Have you ever missed chances? Yeah, of course I have. Well, let's watch them. So how can we add 5 scrappy goals, or 5 goals on your weaker foot, or 5 goals in the air? Because 10 goals more to you this season's worth. So I like players like that. I like players that give me an answer that I'm not catching them out, but they give me an answer that means I can lead to another question and keep the conversation going. I also think that as you get up the ages, you'll get people say, well, I make people around me better. Well, go on, that's an interesting one. How? Well, I set the standards every day in training, or, I'm a great teammate and stuff like that, because a team has to have lots of different ingredients in it. I think it's important as well that as a coach, like, there's a lot of things I don't know, and as young players, it's just admitting sometimes that you need help and you don't know. I think that the most fascinating people I see in our game are constantly obsessive with learning and getting better, because they arrive in a situation where they realize they don't know, and they're not afraid to say that they don't know. Do you know what I mean? I think that's it. I think that's the key to learning. And most of the, I don't want to name any senior players like while we're talking, or, and don't want to name drop any, certainly, but the best players, they're obsessed with getting better. And it's very much an individual thing. So they'll be in early in the morning, and they'll be doing their pre-ab, and they'll be doing their extra gym session, and they'll be training, and they'll be training with an extra focus. And afterwards, they'll be eating the right things and doing all the recovery and stuff like that. And when you do that for 90 out of 100 days, and someone else only do it for 10, you'll make gains. And it's a bit like, I don't think you can stand still. Is your talent fixed? Is your personality fixed? I think it takes people to 25, 26 to actually know they are just as humans as well. Like, I think as a coach, I thought I knew so much 20 to 30, and then the last few years have been massive for me, and I can articulate it a little bit more. I think I've got the same ideas, but I think I can sell them ideas a lot better than what I could before. And I think I couldn't, as a young player myself, I couldn't push myself physically to the limit when I was challenged in terms of not competition within the team. That was fine, but when I was challenged mentally in terms of pressure, when I was trying to break through at Charlton, I couldn't handle it. Now, if I'd have stayed in the cooker a bit longer, would it have worked itself out? Probably. But did the team have enough time to allow me and 1 or 2 others to do that? No. And that's the business that we're in. So I think before first team or young players get a chance to get with the first team, the work that you do in the youth is so important. And a lot of it, as I said, is like, you know, it's hard for me to say this to coaches because I've written books and I love practices and I see myself as a field coach. But my experience now is the work you do around the session and before it, and the environment and the conversations you have, and the level of intellect in the conversations that you have, that sparks creativity and that sparks development. And then the players arrive at the pitch in a complete different level to an environment that doesn't have that.
Thanks, Mick. That's a fantastic insight, and it's actually I was going to ask a couple of questions just around, you know, what you're seeing as, I guess, deficiencies in the kids that are close but not quite there, and maybe the mentality and the hunger for learning that you referenced is one of them, and it would be a huge, you know, a huge piece of advice to the young players listening to obviously embrace that type of characteristic that Mick is talking about. What I will allow now, Mick, is I want to take it to the questions that the audience have posed. Sky, I wonder if this is similar based on, Mick, what you've just said around understanding the work around the session. But if there were a piece of advice that you would give to your younger self, what would it be?
Take your time a little bit. You know, I've always, you can see I like to talk, so I was quite outspoken as a young coach, and I look back at him and think, oh, just be quiet, just chill a little bit. But I suppose my ignorance is my biggest strength, my biggest weakness as well, I think. Do you know what I mean? I have this drive for the game. I feel myself as an explorer in the game, so I'm constantly working like crazy. I'm on the computer non-stop, and I'm speaking to people in football. So I'm obsessed with the game. It's my life. It's what drives me. And so, you know, I've spoke to a lot of coaches about this recently, about advice we would give to our younger self. And we've all said, you know, as much as you want that coaching badge because you think it will get you the job, just getting the badge is like, you know, passing your driving test. There's so much more that makes you a good driver or not. And I think that your personality, your delivery, I think your eye for players and everything gets better with time. So don't rush. If you're building a career, build your career. Do you know what I mean? Build it step by step. And you know, what I would also say to my younger self is knock the hours out just like I did, because them hours that I did in soccer schools, in football in the community, working with young players, the ability that I still show to go back and work with young players after working at the first team in Brazil, to go back and work with 6 to 12-year-olds. They were fantastic decisions. I actually see myself as a coach of any age group. I don't see myself as a first team coach. And if I go on to manage or run an academy each day, I just see myself as a coach of football players. I like going on the journey with players. So I would say to myself, do that, because them hours that you knocked out in women's football and in younger age groups and mixed ability and disability football, they will all help you when you get to where you want to go.
Mick, I'm curious. Did you feel that you were ready for the opportunities that you were handed? Obviously, the progression through Chelsea and Liverpool was a fast one. So based on what you've said, because some of the conversations that we have here as younger coaches, coach educators, is like we talk to teams about earning the right to win. We earn the right in our industry to get to that dream job or whatever that role might be. But once I get there, I need to make sure that I stay there. I don't want to just get it and not be ready and kind of bounce back down. So just curious, like, did you feel prepared? Did you feel ready, like, for the opportunities that you had?
You feel that you're ready. You feel that you're ready. I felt at 22 that I could be Jose Mourinho, but I knew I couldn't be. Now I've got somewhere along that journey now. But no, you feel that you're ready. And in the first day, you complicate things in your head. So my advice would be is that a 27-year-old's like a 12-year-old. They want to play football. They don't want to listen to you talk. They don't want to come too far away from the game. They come to train and they want to play. So I think you've got to allow the game. The game gives you a lot of things as a coach, and you've got to allow the game to do that for you. And then you'll settle. I think at each level, you know, as an English coach, turn up at Sao Paolo with the Uruguayan captain, the centre forward for Argentina that played with Messi, and 5 or 6 Brazilian internationals, youth and seniors, and players from Ecuador. And there's this guy from English who's speaking really bad Portuguese and bad Spanish. That's out of your comfort zone. What got me by? Well, it's football, isn't it? It's football. So I think where we will work ourselves up, and this will be At every stage of our life, when we go for a job interview, we wound ourselves up complicating things. And I think as a football coach, you're very lucky because the players want to be there. But they want to be there for what reason? They want to play football. They want to attack and defend goals. They want to work. They want to be competitive. Start with that, and the rest of it will fit together. I think if you show that you're human as well, so you show your human qualities, and just be yourself. And there's been a couple of times in my career, I'm talking to myself now, I've had to beat myself up with that. I've had to learn a little bit the hard way. So my advice would be that the game gives you a lovely platform to start from. So, I remember the first time that I went across to Melwood as a young coach at Liverpool. So Melwood is the first team training facility, and Steven Gerrard was in the session, Luis Suarez was around, and you have these players over. As my ability to communicate become better. So when I had some of these players dropping into the reserves like Lucas Leiva and Balotelli and people like that, as I became better, as I became more mature as a human being in my communication skills, that's when I become a better coach, because I could have a two-way conversation with them. And I stopped coaching the player, this first team player that's top, and I just started coaching the person. And I think that's it. It's separating the two things, and having a conversation in the morning about players. What do you need from the session today? What, how are you feeling coming into it? And just doing that welfare when players arrive, I found that really helps me at any level, just them personal skills of morning. How are you? How are you feeling this morning? Just having that informal thing, it breaks down the player to the person. And I think you have to realize that, all these coaches that are out there working with these world famous players, they're all thinking they have all had periods of thinking exactly how you think. And I think that they're all there to play football, so allow them to play. Footballers love playing football. Do you know what I mean? Never forget that. Do you know what I mean? You can break it down to all these passing drills, these little fancy practices. I'm not saying they don't want to do it, but they love playing the game. So let the game help you.
You keep making a point, Mick, and I keep hearing it, and I love it. It's simple. I remember Eric Harrison saying to me as a young kid, football's a simple game complicated by idiots. And it wasn't that Eric didn't have a depth of knowledge about everything he was coaching us. He took his time to develop that knowledge within himself so he could deliver the message simply to us. He understood all of the principles and sub-principles and the content that you can get lost in as a coach sometimes. But he had a phenomenal way of simplifying it and getting a message across to his players. And we've talked about a couple of times on these webinars, like looking at game models and 70-page documents full of information on, principles and rules and constraints and conditions. And a lot of players, and any player I've ever played with, needs information very, very simple so we can act upon it, because it's such a dynamic game full of so many moving parts. And if you can't bring game models to life simply with those rules and constraints and conditions in practice, and being at certain clubs where things have fallen apart and the wheels have come off, it has been in instances where managers have overcomplicated it, made it too complex for the players, one, to understand. And the second thing it does, it takes away the love of that game, of just wanting to play and go out there and compete. So I love that the focus you have is on simplicity, but not to be misled by you don't have a depth of knowledge that sits beneath everything that you deliver on the field.
I think I think it's so important that when you're working with young players that you don't use coaching jargon. I think that's really important. I think another thing that's important is that they don't need to know it to the level you do. It's like whispering coaching. You hide the message within them doing. I think we have to take it back to your own learning journey as a person, and that's why I like to have different staff around, because people gravitate towards different types of educators or teachers. But generally, if you're enjoying something, you're willing to take information on and continue in a subject, and that doesn't change when you're 10 to when it does when you're an adult. So I think you train maybe 4 times and you play 1 game. How the players enjoy their training and what they think they're getting from it and how much it's developing them as a person will definitely lend into how your team plays at the weekend. It's really important that under pressure, you don't go to become more complex, that under pressure, you stay the same. So you keep that away from your players at first team level. I think the genius of it is Jurgen Klopp, because I think his personality, I think his style of coaching is very complex in terms of you look at it from the outside, but inside it's very simple in how he puts the processes across. and he doesn't want to, he wants very committed young men, obviously, but he doesn't want to weigh too much on their mind. He allows them to be themselves within the team setting. And I think that he's got this lovely, happy medium at the moment. And I think that's why people gravitate towards him when you see him taking his interviews on TV and stuff. I think that he's a highly, highly skilled, intelligent coach, isn't he? But I think he puts it away and across in a way that allows the players. And I think that, Mr. Harrison's comments that you made there are spot on.
Mick, we're inundated with chat messages, and I think it's clear that we could listen to you talk through this all day. I am conscious of your time, so I want to try to get through a few. Adam asks, during your coaching journey, which course or professional development opportunity had the biggest impact on you? Was that the move to Brazil? Did it come before that? What would you say?
The move to Liverpool was big. Because there's a lot of people at Liverpool that I would say not test you, it's just the wrong word, but it's their club. It's their club. So there was a lot of ex-players around that come in and watch sessions that got involved around the 23s, and I loved that. But that was obviously people wearing, this is our club, this is Liverpool, we're a big club, and we had a lot of ex-players around it, and I just felt that it was different, that experience of working in London, then going to work with kids from the north. London's a very diverse city. Liverpool's are less diverse, less people are going to live there. So it's a different type of coaching. You can be doing the under 10s at Chelsea and then doing the under 10s at Liverpool. It's the same age group, completely different job, so I really enjoyed that. The move to Brazil, what did it do? It probably broke the shrink wrap off. You go and work with first team players and it's like, oh, look, there's this player and there's that one, because you've watched them on TV and they may be older than you or the same age as you. And when I went to Brazil, and I was having to learn the second language, I was so focused on the language and the delivery that I forgot that this player plays, Lucas Prato plays with Messi, and that's Diego Lugano, who's played God knows how many games for Uruguay, and this young centre-half, Rodrigo Caia, plays for Brazil. I just lost that. I just focused on the process of coaching, and then when I came back, I was at a complete different level as a coach in terms of my own self-being. I don't know if other people saw that in me, but how I felt. So there's been lots and lots. I've had some really, really fortunate experience. I think when I was a really young coach and we started going with Chelsea Academy to play tournaments in Europe and playing Ajax and Barcelona and the Italian teams, I started learning that our players are good. Our players are very good, and I started. Then that gave me a lot of clarity, and also, there was different things that were going on in terms of them different countries and the culture of the way they played the game. That's another learning thing. So it's hard to put it down to one. I just think there's loads of little things that you see that kick you on to the next level.
Yeah, and I think again you're a perfect example of what a lot of these conversations have discussed, and you kind of embody that the breadth of experiences. Like you said, you've spent time across every level imaginable almost, so the ability to build the capacity to connect with players and to kind of deepen like your skill set and the tools that you've got to go in. I think that for me is one of the kind of biggest takeaways from just hearing you talk more. Obviously your gaffer is going to be somebody who's been a highly influential figure in obviously in your professional journey now, but also in the lives of the followers that he has around the world. And one of the guys has popped up asking just what is it like to work alongside Stevie? What is it that makes him special, and the kind of environment that you guys are building?
Firstly, it's a pleasure to work alongside him. I loved him as a player. He's slightly older than me by a year, I think, but obviously that means I've watched his whole career, and it just seemed like every Saturday he was scoring a goal late in the game to bail Liverpool out or to win something for Liverpool. I think he had an incredible career, consistency over a long period of time. He stood for, we had a lot of top British players at the time when he was there, Beckham, Scholes, Lampard, himself, all playing in that same midfield for England. What a time that was. And the consistency them guys showed over a number of years is unbelievable. And it's because of an obsession. So I see that in him now as a coach. I understand why he was the player he is. His work ethic's unbelievable. I think he sees work ethic and integrity and desire and them things. I think he sees them as talents. They are talents to him. They're talents that other people don't have. And I think he's intrigued, just as hungry and intrigued by the coaching world as he was when he was a player. I think he communicates very well, and he's very composed under pressure. So it's a pleasure to work with him. we share a lot of the same ideas on football, and no, I'm really enjoying it. You know, like to work with him, to be asked to work with him, for me was a fantastic thing, because we didn't really know each other. So that was obviously the bits that he had either seen of me or people had recommended, and I'm so pleased he did, because obviously it's been a great opportunity for me so far.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mick. I think I'm going to disappoint people here. I don't want to steal more of your time. I don't know if we're at the hour that we said.
No, go on, mate. I can keep going. You can keep going. If you've got
thank you. Okay, just jumping back to the players. Brett asks, obviously you've seen a number of players that are close, that get the start, that get the jump up. Like, how do you determine whether a young player is ready to step up to first team football? Like, what is it that you look for?
There's a look in their eye. With every young player, before he makes a debut, he has a look in his eye. So you can be cheesy and call it the eye of the tiger or whatever you want. I call it like locked in. I just feel they're locked in, that football is their everything at that moment in their life. They're learning, they're living, breathing it, they're first in. There's a look in their eye. The key is, how long do you keep it there? So I look at Trent Alexander and it's still there. And I think, you know, there's things after you make a debut that needs managing, really needs managing, you know, because everyone wants a part of the player then. Social media, the fans, his agent, finances, his support network, the people in the club, everything gets heightened around you. And when your emotions are heightened, then you either run for the hills, or you survive and fight it, or it doesn't affect you at all. And it's really hard to deal with that situation. It's on a player by player basis. I think that's why everything's so individual. But before they break through, there's a look in their eye. If you're talking about what technically, tactically, then I just think you have a feeling when the boy's around it, whether he's taking this all in his stride. And I think you challenge him. I think what you try to do is, in the nice way, you try to break players in training. And what I mean by break them is you try to take them to a point of, if you've got 3 or 4 wingers and it's a good young fullback, you just throw the different types of wingers at him and see when he's struggling. You play the distances you're going to play in the real game. You don't keep playing these small-sided games. You open it out and you put him into fatigue in training to see how he handles it. And, because that's what will happen. If you pick a young fullback, for example, here in Scotland, then they'll pull a centre forward off on his shoulder and they'll hit a diagonal early in the game and see how he is, or they'll feed the wide player, or they'll stand that ball up at the far post. And I think they're the sort of things you talk to the player about, their biggest fear on the football pitch, and it might be the last minute of the game, the ball goes out wide to Eden Hazard and he's one-on-one. Well, you're better off having that conversation before that actually happens at Stamford Bridge or the Bernabeu and stuff like that. I remember a young Trent made his debut at Old Trafford, for example, against Martial in a huge game. A huge game for him as a young kid, a huge game for both teams at the time, in one of the best arenas in the world, against a top young player that was 3 or 4 years older. So you'd like to think that you ticked a few boxes that helped him on that day, rather than standing there with your head in your hand and you can't look. But yeah, for me, before a young player goes through, he's just, he's ready. He's got that look in his eye. My advice to coaches is, how do you keep it there?
And that readiness, do you think, Mick, comes from the exposure to first team training environment? I think back to my transition coming through and other players that were coming through at the time. I remember a young kid called Gavin Naylor, who had a wand of a left foot and was a phenomenal left winger, and Gary Neville would pull him to do one-on-one training. Because Gaz felt that's something he needed to improve. And Gavin would tear him up at times. He'd rip him to pieces. But you put Gav in a structured first team training practice, where now it's not just him versus one other, but now he's got to contribute, and he might have a Roy Keane or a Paul Scholes or a Nicky Butt or somebody drilling him to be better on the ball, have a better first touch, putting pressure on him to deliver a little bit more. That was where he fell apart a little bit mentally. So the gaffer's looking and going, I can't stick you out on the field yet. I can't put you in front of 60,000 people and give you a role and responsibility. And I always feel that's where the manager tests the temperature. That's the thermometer. And he's going, look, can he handle it as we ramp up the pressure, as players ramp up the pressure on you? Do you crumble, or do you pop your chest out, body language, as you alluded to, and accept the mistakes you do make and continue to want the ball? And I think when the manager sees those few indicators, they're like, all right, yeah, he's ready for half a game. He's ready for 70 minutes. Let's now test him. I think the training environment's are key. There's key indicators that happen there.
Yeah, one big one for me is it'd be interesting to get your take on this. I don't think coaches pick players. I think senior players do. I think when you're a coach and you've brought a young player over, I think the senior players will pick him, because I think they'll let you know. And I think that once you're accepted by the changing room, I think that's the same for new signings as well. So when you're new into an environment, whether you're young or you're a new signing, the coaches are the ones that have brought you there. So they believe in you. They brought you there. It's your teammates then. So that's why I go back to, would your teammates pick you, and for what type of game? If all of your teammates in a squad of 25 have all got you in the starting 11, you've got to be doing something good every day. Then it's whether you want to stay at that club or progress. If that's already one of the best clubs in the world, like it is for Trent, and them senior players want him in the team, then I think that's fantastic. I think that's more important than your manager's brought you there. He's investing in you anyway, whether it's up from the academy. So I think that's key. I think that, you win over your teammates, don't you?
I think one of the worst things you can have happen to you as a young player is a first team player give you the ball, you give it away a couple of times, and then you're open for a pass, and that first team player turns away from you. That's one of the most disheartening moments as a young player, because you're like, that's not acceptance. He's turned me down when I'm in a good position and I want the ball, and he's not giving it to me. And a manager will look at those things, because again, he's thinking of team dynamics. So I agree wholeheartedly, Mick. First team, the senior players in the first team, how they accept you really does define if you're going to get minutes on the pitch as a good young player.
Mick, you talk about building super strengths, and I love that phrase of kind of, elevating your special weapons and your X factor. But how important is it to the young players to be versatile? Like how much of the work that you're doing, at 14s, at 16s, at 18s is on exposure to different roles and responsibilities? And perhaps if you could speak to when you were, heading up those age groups, if you think to game models, and, would you play a striker as a centre back, for example, so that they could learn some of the ideas that the centre back had to think about in a game? Would you play wingers as fullbacks? Would you do anything that was kind of slightly off the cuff to try and help with their both game awareness and holistic development, I guess?
But I think you've got to have transferable skills. I think it's really important, Tom, that you might be a winger that ends up a fullback. That's Ashley Cole. You might end up a centre midfielder that ends up centre back. That's John Terry, for example. So you have to have transferable skills. This is why I say it comes back to your hard drive. And you get this when you first start playing. Your receiving skills are massive in football. If you can receive the ball and you can release it well, 0 to 20 yards, then you can move around the pitch. You can go from playing in the middle to the side. So. And at different times of your physical maturation, you might need them positions as well. So you might need to move out of midfield to right fullback just to have space to play while you're small. And you might then move back into midfield. I wouldn't play so much. I don't know if I play with positions. I play with orientation. So you have players that are good at facing the game, some that are good at playing on the side, and some that are good at playing in the middle. I really worry now we have mini soccer, and I don't like. It's not that I don't like the concept of mini soccer. It's I don't coach mini football. Coach football. So coach the ability to play 1v1. Coach the ability to play in connection 2v1 or with 1 or 2 players. Because I think if you draw a 20-yard area around any football match, it's not 11v11. It's a load of little small positional games. So the entrance level to get on the pitches, you should have pride with your relationship with the ball in terms of your technique. And the second entrance on the pitch, you should be able to play 1v1 in your own way. So if you're getting at me, I should be able to take it off you. If I've got it, I should have a trick or a way of playing and connecting with someone to get past you. I think that's essential. I think their tactics, the best tactic in football is me going past you or you stopping me going past you. That's the best tactic. After that, I think then coaching can come in. But if you was to say to me, we were going to go into a club tomorrow, and you can have an under-18s team and they're technically outstanding, every player, or they're tactically outstanding, me and you would take the technical ones, and in 4 weeks we'll teach them how we want to play. Because that happens at every club up and down the country and everywhere in the world. A manager goes in, previous manager's playing 4-4-2. Another guy goes in that he wants to play 4-3-3, and he's able to get that across in a pre-season period, or even if he goes in mid-season in 2 or 3 weeks. Not perfect, but it's a rolling program every day. So how is he able to do that? Well, it comes down to the individual qualities of the players. And so therefore, I'd say just give yourself transferable. I think the ability to receive the ball, to see both goals before the ball comes, to receive, watch your back foot, your front foot, to protect it, your first touch to space, a trick to outplay someone. And that's not a load of step overs. That's just a fake, a fake to pass and chopping the ball, or a fake with a movement to go. I think fakes, best player in the world, Messi, I don't see him use tricks. I see him use fakes to go past people. So there's a lot of transferable skills. And I think if you've got transferable skills, there's 11 or 10 outfield positions you can play in. So it might be that you want to play at the Premier League as a midfielder, but you're a championship midfielder, but you can play in the Premier League as a right back, for example. Or, you really want to be a number 9, but you're not a killer, but you could be a number 7. So it's having these transferable. So it comes back to that relationship with you and the ball. And that's what my advice would be to coaches of young kids, because kids are not playing outside so much now. And it still drives me mad when I go to my little boys under 7s practice and there's 15 balls in a bag and there's 1 ball out for the majority of the session. Get them balls out of the bag, for God's sake.
Thank you. And I think one of the points there, you said it kind of comes down to there being 11 positions on the field. I think the humility that obviously you've suggested is important as well, and the character piece of encouraging players to be willing to take those risks and understand that, as we said right at the start, do you want to be in the team, or do you need to be in the team? Do you want to be a footballer? Do you need to be a footballer? Like, what lengths are they willing to go to, and how can you support them in making the best decision for their development? Just a quick one. One of my staff coaches has asked, your new book is set to be released in next week.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, where we can find it, how we can access it?
Yeah, just on my social media, it'd be like an ebook. I've got a couple in production at the minute. I've not had much time. We've played 53 games in the first 7 months of the season this year. So it's been there. It's about 11v11, about practice games of 11v11. I'm now at first team level, and obviously that's what you have every day. And it's not like your A license. It's how do you develop your playing style if you've only got 15, but you need to recreate 11v11. So that'll be out next week, and they can, on social media, they can find me, and it'll be available there. It's a bit different to the other books because I've always focused on practices for the younger ages, so this is something different. And I just like to share. I think that's the biggest thing. I think we all steal ideas off each other. They're all the same ideas, by the way. They've all gone around the thing. It's just when the relevance to you when they arrive at your doorstep, if that makes sense. And so there's nothing in there that will blow people away, I don't think, but there'll be some ideas in there which might open a few ideas in their own minds to work with their own team. They're very flexible. It's not set to a formation or anything like that.
Perfect. Well, Mick, I do know we're now 75 minutes in, and I'm starting to feel bad, and I know that you've got obviously an evening to get on with the family. Just as we wrap that up, talking about where people can find you and learning a little bit more, and obviously kind of getting more access to the insight and kind of wonderful story that you have. So social media, website, like where can we get more of you?
Well, I try to blog every now and then. So michaelbealecoaching.com. There's some blogs. It's purely youth development. You're not going to get any insights into my job at Rangers. It's purely for the development of young coach development. There's some chats and interviews on there with different coaches as well, who I think have had interesting careers. So they can catch me on there, and it's Michael Beale as well on Twitter. And thanks for having me on. I'm more than happy to come on again in the future and talk about a different theme if we want to go down the tactical route. But I would say to coaches, don't get lost in the tactics, get lost in people. The players play the game. It's a great saying. I see it last week from Cruyff, that teams don't learn, the players within teams learn. So he is my idol. He is the lighthouse of my football beliefs, and I see that quote, and it's just like it's just 7 or 8 words, but it literally you could build a philosophy on it.
Well, we'll pass on that as well. His son-in-law is a good friend of ours over in Spain, Todd Bean. So we'll make sure that we send those regards and signpost him to this conversation to hear that for himself. But Mick, on behalf of myself, Willow, everybody at Team BP, everybody listening now, everybody listening in the future, seriously, mate, thank you ever so much for sharing your time and your insight with us, and we'll definitely take you up on the offer of doing a round 2 for sure. So thank you, and everybody listening, enjoy your weekend. We made it to week 3. We'll be back again for week 4. So we'll obviously hope to see you guys with us there. Thanks, everybody.